Tonight's lecture regarding great books that have made a difference is about a book that is probably very little known in the Jewish world today, though in its time it was not only an important book, it was a revolutionary book, and it brought about to a great extent the strength of the Hasidic movement. In the 18th century, the Baal Shem Tov appears about 1730. He dies about 1755. This book is published in 1780. So it's only 25 years after the death of the Baal Shem Tov. The man who wrote the book is Rabbi Yaakov Yosef HaKohen. Now, he was a well-known Gaon, Rav, and he was also a well-known Misnageh to Chassidus at the onset. However, he somehow met the Baal Shem Tov, or the Baal Shem Tov met him, and the Baal Shem Tov converted him. He converted him into one of his major disciples. And in fact, he is probably the only one of the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov that wrote about the Baal Shem Tov and wrote about the ideas and Divrei Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. So he's the pipeline, he's the conduit, he's our attachment to the Baal Shem Tov. Because what we know about the Baal Shem Tov are stories. And stories are very valuable, but it's like stories in Judaism are the dessert. Or even worse, it's the piece of cake after the tea, which is after the dessert. But you can't have a whole meal out of, I mean, yes, some people can, but no nutritionist would recommend that you have a whole meal out of desserts. And therefore, the Baal Shem Tov has to be more than just stories. It has to be more than just the a miracle maker. Because that could not build a movement, and especially a movement that's going to sweep the Jewish people, that by the beginning of the 19th century, 80% of Eastern European Jewry will be Hasidim. So that in 50 years, 60 years, the whole Eastern European Jewish world changed. And it changed against the opposition of the greatest rabbis of the time. It isn't that they were going to have an easy road. The Gaon of Vilna, Rebbe Kiva Eger, other great, giants opposed it bitterly. The Noda B'Yehuda, all of the major players in the halachic world of the 18th century opposed it. And not only opposed it, they put it into Chayrim, they excommunicated, they did all sorts of things to prevent it from succeeding. But as many times happens in life, the more you try to prevent something, the greater the guarantee that it's going to happen. And therefore, by the time of the Napoleonic era, when Napoleon comes east to try and conquer Russia and comes through all of the Jewish areas in Lithuania and Poland and Belarus, by that time, Eastern European Jewry is Hasidic, with the exception of the pockets of the Misnagdim. Lithuania, Latvia, a piece of Belarus, a piece of Volhynia, pieces in what is today the Czech Republic and Slovakia. But the rest of Eastern Europe is just swept away. So why? So there are many reasons, but we'll see that he, in discussing the ideas and the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov opens the window for us as to the agenda of Chassidus. I'm talking about the social agenda and the religious agenda. And we'll see that that agenda was so powerful that the Jewish people, to a great extent, adopted it. So the name of the book is Toldos Yaakov Yosef. In Chassidus, he's called the Baal HaToldos, the man that wrote the book, the Toldos. Toldos literally means the generations. Yaakov Yosef is his name. So he ends up being a rabbi in a town called Polnoe. And he is called Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoe. No one wants to publish this book. It's, well, you know, you think if we have controversial books in our time, that's nothing compared. Everything in our time is nothing compared to what was. Even the fights, the disputes. Our apicorsim are also minor league. You know, you haven't got the real thing. They had the real thing. So no one wants to publish the book because you have the fear of the chayrim against you. You also have the fear that both sides, the chassidim, the misnagdim, went to the government to inform one against the other, so that there could always be a knock on the door in the middle of the night. So because of that, the book is brought to press by his son and his son-in-law, who are safely ensconced in the land of Israel. But the book is published in Eastern Europe, in a place called Koretz, which was famous in the Second World War. And it's interesting, at the beginning of the book, the publisher writes, it's almost, it's almost humorous. He said, and I'll translate it for you. He said, we had so much trouble publishing this that I couldn't get any rabbi to approve the book, to give a rabbinic approbation to the book. Now, at that time, in Eastern Europe, the rabbinic approbation was necessary for three reasons. One reason was because of the censor, because of the government. And the job of the rabbi was, so to speak, to make sure that the book did not have any revolutionary, treacherous, anti-Tsar material in it. The second reason was the copyright. And included in all of the approbations was the fact that you had no right to reprint the book for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years without the permission of the publisher. So that was copyright protection. The third reason was that if you had a book that had a lot of rabbis that said it's a good book, so then it's likely that, that the book would enter into people's homes. He writes here, he couldn't get anybody. Lo yacholti lahasig haskomos migonei eretz. I could not get any written approbation from any of the leading rabbis of the country. However, he says, almost tongue-in-cheek, Ki betuchim anachnu sheyaskimu kulon keechad. I'm certain that all of them agree that this is a great book, even though nobody will say so. So here again, and the book gets printed. How did the book get printed? At the end, you see how it got printed. Because he gives a tremendous mishaberach to the Duke. He's to the Polish Duke that was there at that time. And because of that, I guess the Duke was so flattered, or it could very well be that the Duke also got some payment for having this done. So he says, Adoneinu hamiyuchus hagodol HaChosid, the Duke Yosef, Nashtarasky, Stalanik, Litvasky, Statarati, Latsky, Yorum Hodo, may he be glorified. So the Duke is the one that gave the Haskomet to the book. He's the one that gave the approbation to the book. And the Duke is the one that says, it's a copyright, you can't steal it. So here you have, in this small vignette, at the beginning of the book, which, you know, without my brilliant lecture, you would never catch this. You have already what the problem is. This is an underground book. It's a book that the establishment is not willing to see come out to print, not willing to let it be distributed. And his family made an end run. They ran around the rabbis. Generally, Chassidus undermined the rabbinate. That was one of its either accomplishments or liabilities, depending on which side you are. But it undermined the authority of the rabbinate. It substituted the Rebbe for the Rav, for the Posek, and it undermined the authority of the rabbis because Chassidim said, you see, you know, the Gaon and the Noda B'Yehuda, the Reb Kiva Eger, you know, they're all wrong. We're right. So that was a major struggle that had ramifications and has ramifications until today. It was Chassidus that undermined the rabbinate, and then the Maskilim came and undermined it further. And then Zionism came and undermined it even more. And then the rabbis finished the job on themselves. So that the authority of the rabbinate at best was local, and at best it was on selected issues. But it was not what it was in the Middle Ages, in the 16th, 17th century, when the word of the rabbi was law, where a rabbi had a right to punish people. As late as the 20th century, 19th and 20th century, there remained in Lithuania the custom that a rabbi had the right to slap someone who was disrespectful, to slap him in the face. There's a famous story with Rav Kook. Rav Kook was the Rav in a small town in Boysk in Lithuania. He was 20 years old or 21 years old, 22 years old. And one of the outstanding Talmidim of Volozhin, Rav Kook was from Volozhin, the Volozhiner yeshiva, and one of the outstanding Talmidim of Volozhin, who was older than Rav Kook, was Rabbi Yisur Zalman Meltzer. The famous Rabbi Yisur Zalman Meltzer, who later was Rosh Yeshiva here in Yerushalayim, of Eitz Chaim Yeshiva. So he came, he visited Rav Kook in Boysk. And one of the people in the synagogue, I guess they were waiting for Rabbi Yisur Zalman either to finish Shmon Esrei or something, right? And so one of the members of the congregation, as sometimes happened, shouted at Rabbi Yisur Zalman, publicly shouted at him. So Rav Kook walked over and slapped the man in his face. In Lithuania, if the Rav slapped you, so then you left town. Because the shame was such that you just didn't stay. So he took a boat to America. In 1923, Rav Kook, together with Rav Duber Kahana Shapiro, the Kovner Rav, and Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein, the Rosh Yeshiva of Slobodka, and later of Hebron here, came to America to raise money to rebuild the yeshivas in Europe after the First World War, for the Vada yeshivas. So Harry Fischel made a big reception for them in the Waldorf Astoria. And he invited all the heavy hitters to come to the reception, and they would meet the great Rabbonim, and they would leave checks, leave money. A man comes up to Rav Kook, and he shakes his hand. Shalom Aleichem, Rebbe. Aleichem Shalom. He says, Rebbe, do you recognize me? Rav Kook looked at him. He said, no, I don't recognize you. He said, 20 years ago, you slapped my face. So Rav Kook turned white. So he said, I came to kiss your hand because that was the best thing you ever did to me, because then I had to leave town. I came to America. I became a millionaire. And he said, if I would have stayed in Boysk, I'd be starving to death, right? So I came to thank you for slapping me, and he kissed his hand. He also gave Rav Kook a personal gift. He gave him a golden watch. Rav Kook, Rav Kook doesn't need a golden wristwatch. He comes back to Eretz Yisrael. This is just what kind of people we're talking about. He comes, and the first day he's back in the office, so to speak. Poor lady comes. She has to. She's a widow. Her daughter's an orphan. She's got to get married. They don't have where to begin with, so he took the gold watch and gave it to her. She sold the gold watch, and they were married. So the man had a greater mitzvah that he had achnosas kala out of the watch that he gave to Rav Kook. So there was a time, so that was like the last vestige of rabbinic power. It was a throwback to what was before. But otherwise, the whole thing was undermined. And here in the book, we will see examples of the agenda. And the agenda was really to undermine the rabbinate, to substitute the Rebbe, the tzaddik, for the Rav, for the posek, for the person in halacha. And to a great extent that was successful, and it still is successful. And only in our time what has happened is that the Rav, to survive, has to be a Rebbe. Right? The Rosh Yeshiva today is a Rebbe. So he does the same thing the Rebbe does. He gives brachas, he gives advice, he counsels. When I went to the yeshiva just a few days ago, nobody ever told us anything. We were, we had all great literature, Rosh Yeshiva. They didn't tell you who to go out with. They didn't tell you who to marry. They didn't tell you what you should do with yourself. They didn't tell you anything. Because it was not their business. And today, you want to buy a Dodge or a Chevrolet, you got to ask. So the world has changed. And that change is part of the triumph of Chassidus. Is because it's forced the misnagdim to redefine themselves as, so to speak, an alternate type of Chassidus. So let's see a few things in the Sefer itself. This is a very big Sefer. First of all, the book itself is pure Kabbalah, 99% Kabbalah. And it's not easy reading. And a lot of what he says is veiled, because there's always this fear yet of expressing it, straight out. So a lot of it is, you have to read it in the white spaces, not only in the black print. But I'll give you an example of the Chassidic approach. He quotes here the Baal Shem Tov. What's the approach to what it says in the Talmud? In other words, is the Talmud to be taken literally? I'm not talking here about the stories in the Talmud. I'm talking here even about what seems the open and shut halachic questions and answers. So Chassidus said, and it says that it has to be interpreted on a different plane. Just as the Torah has many facets to it, the Talmud also has many facets to it. And if you only deal with the Talmud with Rashi and Tosfos, so to speak, well then you're dealing on one level, but you've missed out on other levels which exist. Example, famous, we're coming now to Hanukkah. So the Gemara in Shabbos asks, "My Hanukkah." So the simple explanation is, what is Hanukkah, right? What's the holiday of Hanukkah? Why is the holiday celebrated? And the Gemara there in 2-3 lines tells us that under the Greeks persecuted the Jews, they destroyed the Jewish religion, etc. The Hashmonaim stood against them. There were tremendous wars. And then they came to the temple and reconquered the temple and purified it, and they lit one cruse of oil that the Kohen Gdol seal was still upon it, and miraculously it burned for 8 days. That's the Gemara. So that's open and shut, right? My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? This story is Hanukkah. He quotes here an opinion, and it's interesting, this opinion is mentioned in the Rishonim as well. It's mentioned in the Ran, but it never, reverberated as being the answer, the correct interpretation. But he said, the Baal Shem Tov said, my Hanukkah, the Gemara knows what Hanukkah is. And the Gemara just asks, my Hanukkah, why do they call it Hanukkah? So my Hanukkah is on the word Hanukkah. It's not on the holiday of Hanukkah. All of us know what the holiday of Hanukkah is, so the Gemara wouldn't ask that. The proof is, it doesn't ask my Purim. Because in the Megillah it says Purim is al Shem HaPur. It's because of the lot that Haman cast. But my Hanukkah, why do they call it Hanukkah? So he says the whole answer of the Gemara is to be able to interpret to us why it's called Hanukkah. And he goes through a long, detailed, Kabbalistic pilpul here to explain that that's what it means. Now that's a different approach to the Talmud than the accepted approach. The accepted approach is not looking for that type of an answer. It doesn't lend to the words of the Talmud that type of, I guess what we would say, spiritual meaning. It isn't looking for that. It has a whole different idea. And because of that, that became the source, and it exists until today. If you look in the Hasidic writings, or in the speeches, the lectures, the words of the Hasidic Rebbes, you will always see this kind of a twist to it. For instance, in this week's Parsha, in Parsha's Chayesora, so it says that Vatiskos, she covered her face with a veil. So that's a funny use of Hebrew. So Rashi explains the digdug, right? That it's a hispael. And then Rashi says, and I'll give you other examples, kamo vatikover, kamo vatishober. So you look at the Rashi plane, so Rashi's talking about digdug. The Rishon Rebbe says, and this is the example, the same idea of how to look at something, because the Chassidim did the same thing in Rashi that they did in the Gemara. That Rashi doesn't, you can't just see Rashi on the surface, there's a hidden Rashi within the Rashi. And the hidden Rashi many times is more exotic, it's more attractive even. So here's an example, right? This is a digdug Rashi. We all know how we love digdug Rashis. Remember in the yeshiva, the Rebbe used to learn it, a moan went up from the class. Right? Oh, Nochamol Digduk here, right? Well, leave it alone. So he says, the Rishner says as follows, there are 3 times that a family is together in life. Vatiskos by a chasana, when she puts on the veil. Vatishover, when a child is born. Vatikover, at a funeral. So he says, that's Rashi. Why did Rashi choose those words? Because he wants to tell us this lesson, that these are, so to speak, the 3 life events that hold a family together. It's a tremendous, tremendous insight. A tremendous pshat. Is that what Rashi said? What's the difference? That's what Rashi said. So Rashi has to be seen on a completely different level than we're accustomed to seeing him. And the Talmud has to be seen on a different level than we're accustomed to seeing it. So there are svarim that exist that say, Biurei Chasidus Lashas. Hasidic explanations of the Shas, entire volumes. Now, in the Mir Yeshiva, I don't know if they have a copy of it even, but they certainly don't study it. And it's not, it's not brisk, it's not the way we're accustomed to learn. But it's there, and it was very, very attractive to people. Because instead of saying, this is a Digduk Rashi, look what we're saying. You're saying something that every individual can identify with. And that was the power of Chassidus, was the ability to take all of these ideas of Torah and put them down to a level that everybody could identify with. And that was its secret of why it spread and why it was so popular. Because it's very hard to identify with a very complicated piece of Torah that explains a Rambam. So, I remember that I heard shiurim from great Rosh Yeshiva. After 10 minutes, nobody knew what he was talking about. But it lasted another hour. Because no one, you weren't up to it. But if I tell you, at a funeral, at a wedding, at a bris, the family is together, everybody understands that. And that was the lodestone of Chassidus, the magnet that held it together. So he says as follows. Let's talk another thing. And all of this is commentary to Parshas of the Torah. So in Parshas Vayigash, he discusses, and here's a direct frontal attack on those that say that the only thing in Judaism is to learn Torah. Here's a direct frontal attack on that idea, which you can imagine is heretical. So it says, he quotes here the words of the Rabbi Zinovos. So again, he's going to take a phrase in the Mishnah that all of us know and that has an explanation, and all of us know the explanation, and he's going to say that's not the real explanation. The real explanation is below that. So it says, Lo kol amarbe b'schora machkim. Not everybody that does a lot of business becomes wiser thereby. She'ein ha-Torah b'socharim. The Torah isn't with the businessmen. So simply put, how we would interpret it is that if you're on Wall Street, 14 hours a day, so there's very little Torah that you can accomplish. But the Baal Shem Tov said, and he quotes it here, he says, who is the socher? The socher is the lamdan. The one that's learning Torah. He says, because otherwise, what do we need a Mishnah to tell me that what? That if you're 14 hours on Wall Street, you're not going to become a Talmid Chacham, you're not going to become a holy man. We know that without the Mishnah. So the Mishnah comes to tell us something else. Who is the socher? Who is the businessman? That's the man that sits and learns all the time, but he doesn't do anything else. He doesn't care about other people. He doesn't care about prayer. He's intellectually involved in learning, purely. So he said, the rabbis came and said, Lo kol amar b'tzora. Somebody that learns a lot of Torah, no, it doesn't make him a wise man. It doesn't mean that, he still doesn't get it. Now, you say that, to the Lithuanian Jewry at the time of the Gaon of Vilna, that is plenty radical. It's plenty radical today, but like nobody knows the book and nobody knows what it says, so, So he says here, that they don't realize Anoshim she'oskim b'Torah mitzvahs yomam v'layla. They're doing it, right? But nevertheless, they forget ki odom ein tzadik boris asher yaseh tov v'lo yechta. There are no perfect people. And therefore he says that since it says ki odom ein tzadik boris, so they say about the tzaddikim that the tzaddikim are wrong. So he said you can be a lamdan, you can be osek b'Torah all the time, but if you say that the tzaddik is not a tzaddik, you're doomed. And therefore he says, Ato nosein dofi lomar al gadoshe elyon, and the holy people, you have doubts about them, you have insults about them, so he's reflecting his time. What they said about each other. And therefore he says that just because the person is learning all day doesn't mean that that he's got it. Well, that is swimming upstream, against the waterfall. Now, let's see another thing. He talks here about those that use the Torah for their own benefit because of the fact that they are scholars, so therefore they lord it over others. So here he's speaking about the social revolution of the time, because Chassidus was a revolution against the upper class and against the intellectual class. Because they said, the plain people, they're Amioritz, they don't know anything, they're like, they don't count. Which was the truth in 18th century Eastern Europe. So he says here, Birbos Hashonim, this in the Parshas Vaychi. He has all of these things hidden in the middle of all. He's talking about a whole Kabbalistic interpretation of a pasuk, and all of a sudden he throws out, he throws the hand grenade out of there. This whole lecture is to prove that sometimes I do prepare. Birvos hashonim nismatu halavovos lahaskin lahovin lahaskil al derech oemes. He said, over time, the souls of the Jewish people, of the leaders of the Jewish people, have weakened that they really don't understand anymore. Rak lasos ma Torah a Torah lis gadol bohem. And they made out of the Torah only a crown for their own self-aggrandizement. Uli spoyer bohem. And to show off. So custom was, it still is in many places, the custom was that if somebody came to town to talk to the rabbi would first say, let's discuss Torah. You know, I got to hear a Rambam, that's hard. What do you say to it? And then, so many times the person was put to shame because he was unable to discuss it, or it was in a subject matter that he was not familiar with. I remember as a child, the thing that I resented greatly was that rabbis would come in, we were in school, they'd come in and ask us questions, give us a bechina. Who asked them to come in? I remember I would come home to my mother, I was 9, 10 years old, 12 years old. I go, no, they said, this rabbi from so-and-so, other time he came in, who needs him? And I, when I was younger, I had more vigor. So I said, they're showing off. Because they're going to ask you, they ask trick questions, and they're showing off. They're not interested in what you know. And my mother washed my mouth out with soap. But I always resented it. And later on, when I had a yeshiva, I never allowed it. Never allowed it. Rabbonim used to come, and I would entertain them, but I would never allow them to go into the classroom to ask the boys anything. So I don't say I'm right. It's just that I'm not wrong. And then he says another thing. So this is a direct attack on the rabbis, right? On the Lomdim. That they use the Torah as a means of self-aggrandizement. I remember a Rav, as an unbelievable story, but it's true. I remember he had a disagreement with another Rav in town, and he always used to walk around with a small Gemara learning. So I remember he stopped another rabbi on the street. He said, bring me a proof from this Gemara that the other guy doesn't know how to learn. So something is wrong, right? Something is skewed. And that's what he harps upon. Hu laharos maloso. He said, even those that write shilas and chuvas, he says. He says the word balei tshuva. He doesn't mean balei tshuva in our sense, a balei tshuva. Balei tshuva is a sarcastic reference to the rabbis that write the tshuvas, that write the responsa, the rabbinic responsa. Zeu rak laharos maloso. He only wants to show how great he is. He doesn't want to answer the question, because he wanted to answer the question, answer it. He writes 15-page letter, right? Answer it. Ucheshalomar halocho echod mispoyer ma'at. Ucheshalomed yoser mispoyer yoser. He becomes more and more proud of himself. Ucheshalomed poskim bo Kabbalah, and if he knows poskim, or he thinks he knows Kabbalah, misgoyer yoser, so then he becomes even more proud of himself. V'zeh rochok me'Hashem yizborach. And therefore they're far away from God. Well, that's really and here he has an attack on those that want to go away to learn in yeshivas. It's just unbelievable what he writes here. Yuvan shemi shemachatatim ragleim lelech b'yeshiva lilmod. Those that go away to yeshivas to learn, and because of that they become haughty. O tosifu sora liyisrachik velosur Hashem yizborach. So they go even farther away from God. There's an interesting piece in the Mahir. Chassidus is a change in nuance. It's not really, they weren't really machadesh anything. They didn't create new things. What they did is they changed the whole nuance, the whole emphasis, the whole accent. So for instance, there's a very famous piece in the Mahir. In the time of the Mahir, like in other times, people had big tzitzis that they wore outside their begodim. So the Mahir writes there, in Sota, just again, a mind-boggling statement. He says that there are a lot of phonies in the world. They're people who are not sincere. He said, misatfim betalisos gdolos. They wrap themselves in large talesim. V'tzitzioseim niros merachok. And you can see their tzitzis from far away. He says, Aleim ani omer vayotzitzu kol po'alei oven. All those, it's a play on words. All those that come to do evil. So vayotzitzu means I see them, I glance at them. And they spring up. They come up from the ground. Tzitz. But it's a play on the word tzitzis. So he says, those that have that public demonstration, he says, vayotzitzu kol po'alei oven. So the problem of hypocrisy is an old problem. It wasn't invented in the 18th century. But in the 18th century, Chassidus harped upon it. And therefore there were entire sects of Chassidim, like Pshischa and Kotsk, who hid their piety, who went out of their way to pretend as though they were not pious Jews, so that they would not have this hubris, that they would not have this sense of that they're the greatest. But that's the point that he makes here. Let's see another few examples here. He says in Parshas Baaloscha, so we all know in the menorah that existed in the Mishkan, in the temple, so El Mul Pnei HaMenorah Yoiru Shivas Aneros, the middle candle, the other three on one side and the other three on the other side faced into the middle one. How that worked, there's a whole discussion in the Gemara and Menachos, how it worked, how the candle was lit, and to be able to do that. So he says, and it says, Vayas Kain Aaron. And Aaron did what he was told to make the candle, to light the candelabra in that manner. So again, we're going to take what is on the surface a very clear statement, right? That you got a menorah with 7 candles, and the middle candle is the important candle, and the other 6 candles are going to be, the other 6 lights are going to be bent in somehow to face the middle one. That's what the Torah says, right? But again, because of the fact that we do not accept only one facet of the Torah, we do not accept just one interpretation, but we're going to look for a deeper, more exotic, more spiritual interpretation. So he says, the one candle in the middle is the tzaddik, is the Rebbe. And that's what it means, Vayas Kain Aaron. Aaron is the first Rebbe. Because Aaron, according to Kabbalah, the Kohen Gadol, inculcated within himself all the souls of Israel. And that's why on Yom HaKippurim he could ask for forgiveness for all of the Jewish people, because within him all of the Jewish souls were present. Which he says is what the Rebbe is. The Rebbe is the one that has all the souls of the Jewish people within him. That's the tzaddik. And therefore, everyone, so there are other candles, he says, no question. There are 6 other candles. There are great men, there are great lumdim, there are pious people, etc. But all the candles have to face into the tzaddik. They all have to have an allegiance to him. Because otherwise you are not fulfilling what the Torah says. Vayaskein Aaron she'oso v'tikein Aaron es atzmo lios sadik v'al yedei ze yuchol lahalos oson she'yoiru kulon. Through the middle candle, through Aaron, through the Rebbe, all the other 6 candles are uplifted, just as the Kohen Gadol possesses the souls of everyone, so the Rebbe is able to lift everyone up. So now you have again this great Hasidic idea that if you're attached to the Rebbe, you're in good shape. Because by being attached to the Rebbe, you're automatically attached already to the Ribono Shalom, because the Rebbe is attached to the Ribono Shalom. The example that I've always given about the plug of electricity, right, the sheka, right, so the generator's out in Chadera somewhere. We're not plugged into that. But if you plug yourself in here, and then it's plugged to the high wire lines, and the higher wire lines go to the Reading plant in Chadera, so then you're plugged into the generator, you're plugged into the chashmal. So the Rebbe is the sheka, he's the plug. So you got to plug yourself into him. Basic Hasidic idea, which explains a great deal of how the Hasidic world works. And why it works. And why the Rebbe has such devotion. Is because of the fact that the other 6 candles are useless without him. Here he says the Gemara. The Gemara says, the famous Gemara on Rebbe Lozer Reb Shimon. Rebbe Lozer Reb Shimon was the son of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. So Rebbe Lozer Reb Shimon worked as a tax collector for the Romans. The Gemara in Bava Metzia. And believe it or not, there were some Jews that avoided paying the tax. So he turned them in, because that was his job. He was, he was working for the Mas Achnasa, for the IRS. So he turned them in. So the rabbis criticized him bitterly. So he said, what do you want from me? Kotzim ani machalem min hakerem. I'm removing all the thorns from the vineyard. These guys are cheaters. They're liars. They're thieves. So I'm removing the thorns from the vineyard of Israel. So they said to him, Yovo balakerem v'yichale kotzim min hakerem. Let the owner of the vineyard come and take out the thorns. So the simple explanation that we all learned in the yeshiva is that he told them, let God do it, right? I mean, you're not God's kosak in the world. The balakerim, God will take care of them. You don't have to mix in. You don't have to work for the Romans. He says a different pshat, which again is illustrative of the point that I have made, of the underlying tenor of all the Gemaras. He says, Yovo balakerem yechale es kotzov rotzalomar kotzov shel atzmo yevayer. You're the balakerem. They told him, are you perfect? Did you clean out all the thorns that are within you? First, Yovo balakerem v'yichale kotzov. Let the man of the vineyard, clean out your thorns. Then we'll come and clean out thorns from others. And they're saying it on great Tanoim, right? And that really is the pshat the Gemara says on the posuk in Tanakh, is kosheshu v'koshu. So the Gemara says, Kshot atzmecha v'yachar kach kshot acherim. First, decorate yourself. I always think of that when I fly on the plane. So they have those instructions that you should never need. But they always say, first put your oxygen mask on, and then you'll put the oxygen mask on the person next to you that may need it. So that's this pshat, right? I always think of the Gemara. Everybody's, there's a musar in everything that happens in life, right? First put on your oxygen mask, then you put on the other person's oxygen mask. How are you, right? What kind of shape are you in? So that's what they said. Yovel balakerem, you're the owner of your vineyard. Chalekotsim in akerem, you take care of your thorns first. Then we'll talk about the other people's thorns, which is a basic Hasidic idea. Basic Hasidic idea is not to judge others. Now, I have to say as a caveat, I always say that you should not confuse Judaism with Jews. You should not confuse religion with rabbis, and you shouldn't confuse Hasidus with Hasidim. We're talking Hasidus here. We're not talking about how people behave. This is the goal. So the goal is not to be judgmental upon others. In the Torah it says, "Vatikover shom Miriam." Miriam was buried there. And then it says there was no water for the Jewish people. So again, the simple explanation is Miriam died and she was buried there. And because of the schus of Miriam, there was a well, and now the well didn't exist anymore, so there was no water for the people. He says again in the name of the Baal Shem, "Vatikover shom Miriam." Miriam worried for the Jewish people. Miriam was the one that stood to see what will happen with her brother Moshe. Miriam is the one that defended the Jewish people, the Jewish women. She's the one that took them and sang with them at Yam Suf. Miriam is the one that saw that they had water all of the time. Miriam wasn't even afraid even to speak against her brother Moshe because she wanted to defend her sister-in-law Tzipporah. Vatikover shom Miriam. Miriam died. So it's not that Miriam died. That element of love for the Jewish people died. Vatikover shom was buried there. Didn't exist anymore. And that's why there was no water. Because they didn't care for each other anymore. It's also an exalted idea. You know, but to put it in the posuk, to say that that's what it means, but that was the so he quotes the Baal Shem Tov that we say, "Kol hashona halochas b'chol yom muftach lo shu ben olam haba." The word shona, which means to learn, also means to review. From like the word shenis, right? To review it. Because it doesn't say kol halomed halochas b'chol yom. Someone that learns halacha every day. It says kol hashona, someone that reviews it. So the Baal Shem says, the Torah, you don't get it the first time. The Torah doesn't allow itself to be acquired as shitchius in a simple manner. You just, with all due respect, reading the parsha once is not going to give it to you. So it has to be ashona halachas. You have to repeat it over and over again until it becomes part of you. Then you're a ben olam haba. Because then it becomes part of you. It's not something that's separate from you. All right. So then he says here, the Chassidim were criticized because in davening they don't sit still. They move around, they sing, they holler, they clap. And in the misnagdig world, that is not acceptable behavior. So he says, we see it from the Malachim, the angels in heaven. It says that by the Malachim in heaven, that Rotzo Vashov is the posuk. The chayos, the holy animals, whatever exists in heaven there, the angels, are always moving about, back and forth. So he says, because to achieve a concentration for the Ribono Shel Olam, To be able to serve God, you always have to be moving. You have to be able to move yourself, and not to sit. And therefore, he says, the Chassidim are correct, and the others are incorrect. And because of the fact that we are imitating, the Chassidim are imitating the angels, they're imitating the Chayas HaKodesh, the holy beings in heaven that are always rutz over shov, that go back and forth, that go around. So they say the famous story about Napoleon, the Misnagdim tell this story. Chassidim deny it. That Napoleon once came to Chassidish Yishtibel, and he saw what was going on, right? Screaming, hollering, jumping, running, this, back, forth. So he came out and he said, you know, those Jews are clever. He said they got the sane people in one shul and all the insane people in another place. But, I mean, if you've ever davened by Karliner Chassidim, so, you know, it's lively. It's going. Whereas the other extreme in the Lithuanian world was to be very, or the German world, right? I was once in a German synagogue, and I stood up before Kaddish, and the Gabbai told me to sit down. It's not time yet. So you have here, I mean, Judaism has got a very, very wide range of people and ideas, etc. You cannot say right or wrong in these things. So finally he says, great idea, that when they went up to Yerushalayim, so it says, Anoshim, Anoshim va'ataf. The men, the women, and the children, small children. So the Gemara says, what do we need the small children for? Right? Because, you know, in shul they make noise, and they're always looking for candy, and they haven't got a clue what's going on. So you take them to the Beis HaMikdash. What do they know about the Beis HaMikdash? So the Gemara says, in order litain schar lemiviehem, to give a reward to those that bring them. Because eventually the children grow up, and this becomes part of their chinuch, it becomes part of their training, it becomes part of their being, and therefore we want to, that those that bring them should have a reward for having brought them.